Hi, greetings. It's me, Dr. Paul Gerhardt, and this is video 8 in our marketing video series. And today's marketing video is going to be on global marketing. And just like the other videos, you probably have seen some of these concepts or understand some of these concepts, but what the heck? A little bit of a review is always kind of healthy, right? So we're going to be talking about a lot of things as it relates to making sure that you understand some of the considerations and terms related to having a company with a specific product or service, or many products and services, and then understand what to look for as you consider doing business in other countries. And I'm assuming if you're watching this video that you're watching it in the United States, but if you're watching it in another country, I'm sure there are lots of applications to the concepts here too. One of the biggest international brands that's based here in the United States is Coca-Cola. And it is really interesting to see an amazing company like Coke start and then continue to grow into each of the different markets as this world is quickly evolving. You gotta have a global mindset in almost every single industry, because we are competing as an organization, no matter what type of organization that you're in, or just about whatever type of organization, with the rest of the world. Companies like India, for instance, are slowly evolving their economy because they are able to provide highly educated people and into a work source in a virtual environment. So that's just a really good example of how nations are embracing technology and emerging into the marketplace because of their talents. And so anybody can have a successful business with the right kind of strategy, and having a marketing plan and understanding global concepts really is important. There are a lot of different factors that affect the success of organizations, especially as they enter into the global marketplace. Things to consider when considering creating a marketing plan in other countries are recognizing the economics of another country. You have to take in the general economic environment, market size, population growth, the income of people. Infrastructure and technology is a big one. That's transportation channels, communication, and commerce. Government is probably, I think, one of the biggest. It's not the only important, but nobody wants to make an investment in a foreign country if the government is not set up for success. And so ethical governments need to be considered. There's some countries that are just too much of a risk. So tariffs, quotas, exchange control, trade agreements, these are all things that go into consideration. And then there's the social cultural analysis, which is about power distance, uncertainty, avoidance, individualism, masculinity, and time orientation too. And we'll talk about all of those here. So let's talk about economic analysis in the general economic environment. We use terms like gross domestic product, gross national income, the purchasing power parity, and the human development index as various different tools to be able to understand whether or not it's feasible to try to do business in some way in another country. Let's face it, the world is growing in size. People are living longer, and the economies are changing in different areas. And if you want to get a piece of pie, you need to make sure that you're considering population and market size and growth rate. Real income is kind of the bottom line, is can people afford your product or service? And very often companies will make adjustments to an existing product or change the price to meet the unique needs for a particular country. And I'm I'm always surprised when you do the math and you look at the price of cars, for instance, in another country where people's incomes are significantly lower, but people are still driving cars, and you might find those cars to be significantly cheaper in those countries where, as in the United States, the income is significantly higher than many companies, so those prices can afford to be higher in many cases. Infrastructure is really kind of interesting. When we talk about infrastructure, we talk about transportation, communication like telephone systems, internet, distribution channels, and then commerce as a whole. So that's what I'm referring to, is do countries that you're considering doing business with have the ability, highways to be able to get your products to where they need to go into the marketplace? Is the communication infrastructure there where you'll be able to communicate with customers and vendors and people within your market chain? So, and be able to have proper distribution channels in place, and so these are all considerations. Government, as I mentioned, is a big one. Some things that governments do that restrict businesses is their tariffs, quotas, exchange control, trade agreements. So tariffs essentially are taxes that artificially raise prices. When prices go up, the demand generally goes down, right? I can remember watching, I don't smoke, but I'm watching the price of cigarettes, and this is not usually tariffed, but the price of cigarettes has substantially gone up as we vote more taxes into cigarettes, and alcohol too, I suppose. Quotas. Very often a country's government will allow a maximum number of a certain product to come into the country, and that reduces the availability of those imported goods. So both benefit domestically made products because they reduce foreign competition, and that's something to consider. Can you compete in an organization or in a company or country that has high tariffs and quotas on imported products? So exchange control and counter trade are also things to consider. With exchange rate, that means the value of money in in each of the countries. Those are constantly changing, and generally it's their banking system that evaluates what money is going to be worth in other countries. And so if they want to keep it attractive to foreign investors, they'll keep the money low, and that also has an effect on trade domestically within that country too. So European trade agreements. The European Union is one where there's 28 member countries. I'm not going to tell you all of them, but they include Austria, Belgium, Bulgaria, Croatia, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Denmark, Italy, Ireland, Spain, Poland, United Kingdom. NAFTA is something that we talk about in the United States, and that's an agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. CAFTA is the United States, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. Mercosur is Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Venezuela. And then ASEAN, there's a handful of Asian countries that include Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam. So another thing too is you can never assume that we all think the same, and that's one huge factor when you are working in marketing, is how do the sociocultural factors differ? Do they lend themselves to people wanting to purchase your product or service? And so in this, we look at Hofstede's model, which has a focus on power distance, uncertainty, avoidance, individualism, masculinity, time orientation, and indulgence. We also can look at segments in country cultures, and we can do that looking at power distance and individualism. So countries with high power distance are like Guatemala, Venezuela, Ecuador, Colombia. Individualism, is more Canada, United States, Australia, United Kingdom. So there's some examples. You can look those up if you wanted to. So Gerd Hofstede's cultural dimensions model really gives us a framework for us to analyze, our marketing strategies. Another thing to consider is, the appeal to BRIC countries. And the BRIC countries are Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And each of these countries are important to consider because they have an effect on the global economy. And as their economies grow, it changes the dynamics of the marketplace, and we need to consider that in our strategies. When you're choosing a global strategy, you're looking at things like direct investment, joint ventures, strategic alliances, franchising, and exporting. And you're analyzing, how much control you have and how much risk is out there. In your strategy, you really have to consider cultural nuances, subcultures, the view of the product to the consumers, direct positioning, adaptation, single positioning strategy. Language is one. I think about a story where Chevy Nova wanted to export their Chevy Nova. Their Chevy wanted to export Chevy Nova into Mexico, but Nova in Spanish means no go, and so why would Mexicans want to purchase a car that doesn't go? So it's kind of an example of how you've got to really consider a lot of different things in your marketing strategy. So pricing matters, and things that affect pricing as in review are tariffs and quotas, anti-dumping policies, economic conditions, and then competitive factors. Maybe there's already products that are very well established in those countries, and it makes it a little more difficult to get into. Marketing mix is important. Global channels tend to be very, very long and complex. So companies, small shop stores, local stores may not want to be able to sell your product or service, or maybe they can't compete with the larger markets in its place. So literacy levels, communication differences, cultural and religious differences, all these things matter when you're thinking about doing business in other countries. So you got to have a solid global strategy, and lots of things to consider. It might be wise to hire a consultant who's an expert on a particular country and culture when you're going into business. All right, I've given you a lot of things to consider. I appreciate your time and hope that there is something of value that you've taken away from this very long presentation. And I also hope that you have a great day, because only you get to choose how you feel about it.